Hello my dear class 8 students, I'm so glad to be with you all once again. In our previous two classes for English, we have done the Great Stone Phase 1 and now we are going to be dealing with chapter 10, that is the Great Stone Phase 2. I want you to remember that even though they bear the same title, they are of two different chapters, that is chapter 9 and chapter 10. And for today, our chapter 10, you will find it in page number 128 to 132. I repeat, 128 to 132. We have seen in the Great Stone Phase 1 that little Ernest was a boy who keeps listening to stories that his mother tells him. Now you can relate that to yourself when you were a little younger, before you reach class 8, maybe class 5, 6. And now we know a person will keep growing. And so the same thing happened. He grew up to be a middle-aged man. Middle-aged. And so for you, I'm sure you have heard of what middle age is, but roughly let us take the age 45 to 65 years of age group are taken as middle age, though it varies from country to country and region to region. Here, we will see that Ernest had become a middle-aged man, but his neighbors saw him only as an ordinary and a familiar face. You know what is ordinary, right? A person who does not bear any special characters or special qualities that is different from you. So he was just a normal, ordinary human being, and also he was a familiar face with them because even Ernest was a person who worked like the others, the rest of the people in his neighborhood. So they did not consider him to be anything special, and he had still been living with the hope. I want you to remember, as a young boy, he would keep looking at the great stone face that is on the wall of the mountain, and he would just keep hoping every day, every evening, looking at the great stone face that his mother told him about, the story that was related with it. And even now, even after he was a middle-aged man, he still continued living with the hope. Okay, this is what he was doing, but with age, he became a very wise man. The wise man, that is the quality that he had in him. As I've told you in our previous classes, that he did not attend any extra or any special classes. What he did every day, every evening was, after his customary work, that means the work that he does usually. Look at the word customary. Here, customary can mean different things, but in our lesson, it means the usual work that one does. So for you, your customary work can be going to school, writing your homeworks, studying the lessons that your teachers suggest for you. These are your customary works, but for Ernest, the customary work that he did was farming. And he had been doing this all his life. From the moment he was born, he was seated with his mother. The mother will be telling him stories when he grew up, and when he became a middle-aged man, you know, as a person living in the village, the primary work that everyone does will be farming, right? You have seen it. And if you are lucky to be living in one of the villages, you will experience how interesting it is. Of course, it needs a little bit of hard work and concentration too. But you will see the excitement that the people living in towns and cities will never experience. They live among the woods. They live with nature so that they experience the blessing that the people living in the cities and towns will never experience. And so, Ernest was a person like that. He had been living and farming was his work. So every day, he would go to his field, come back, and then what he did as a young boy continued even to his middle-aged man, to his middle-aged years. And so he would be sitting. What does he do when he was young? I'm sure you will all tell me that he would sit outside his cottage and he would be looking at the great stone face, which seemed to be looking at him and smiling at him, trying to say things to him, which became an inspiration for him, right? So let us recollect the story that we have done in our previous two classes. And here, you will also see that as he became very wise, I mentioned that, right? He became a very wise person and his name was well known. He was no more an obscure person. Obscure means unknown, okay? Even though he was just a man living in the village, he became very well known to the people who are from cities and towns. You can imagine that, right? Even professors from the colleges we consider professors to be of very high quality, to have a very good knowledge of the world. And so even these people from the cities would come just to listen to him. And there are so many well-known people who would come to him to seek his advice. And slowly he grew to be an old man. Okay, even me, I don't have to explain the definition of what an old man is. Here, he grew up to be an old man and his hairs turned gray. That's what we usually see. That's what we always see in an old person. And his face were wrinkled. There were a lot of wrinkles on his face and it looked like furrows. You know what is a furrow, right? The lines made by the plows in a field. When you cultivate with any kind of machineries, you will see that the marks of the spade of the machine, let's consider it, or the plow. The plow spade will make some marks, and so his face was filled with the wrinkles, and even the hairs turned white or gray. Let's take it. So more were the wise thoughts in his mind than the gray hairs on his head. You can imagine that. If I ask you to count the hairs on your head, you will just laugh at me, because I know, and you know it very well, that it would be impossible for a person to count the hairs on his head, isn't it? And so this was the same thing. But even though the hairs were numerous, the wise thoughts that were in his mind were as numerous as his hairs. That means which cannot be described. Unimaginable thoughts. The thoughts filled his mind, were so wise that no one could comprehend. Here, comprehend means understand. No one could understand how he gained a lot of wisdom like that. Not all person can be wise. Even if you are very well educated, maybe, who knows, you might lack wisdom. So wisdom has to be attained, and it cannot be attained only through formal education. That kind of education, that kind of schooling that you get can just merely be knowledge gathered in your brains. But the wisdom that this old Ernest had acquired was unimaginable, because he did not go and take any special training, as I've mentioned, but he gained so much that his popularity was known all over the world. And even though he grew old, he still lived with the hope that one day he will meet the face that resembled the face on the mountain. He still had been living. At some point of time, he would even be disappointed. You know what is disappointed, right? If you are expecting for something and you don't get that, what do you feel? We get disappointed. We feel disappointed. And so the same thing was happening to him. But as usual, even in his old age, though he was getting a little disappointed, he did not lose the hope, and then he would be reading a book. Every evening he would just be sitting outside his house, looking at the face on the mountain, and he would be reading the poetry. He read a book of poems, and he saw that the thoughts that the poet had were so wise that he expected to see the face of the man that was on the mountain in the writer or the poet of the book which he was reading. That means this poet did not write only one poem, right? A single poem cannot consist a book. So he had been reading, and every time he reads this book, he would be expecting that the poet of these poetries, of these poems, would surely have the resemblance of the face on the mountain. Why? Because the poetry was so refined, it was so wise, filled with wise words, that he thought that no ordinary man could be able to write this type of poetry. That was the reason why he had been expecting to meet this poet. And he heard that the poet who wrote these poetries, the poet who wrote this book of poems was also from the valley. That means from the area where he lived. And as they had been believing that one of the person from this valley, from this region where he lived, would come with the resemblance of the face on the mountain. And so he had the full expectation now that surely the poet of this book will come with a face that is in resemblance with the face on the mountain. And one evening, as he was having his usual routine, that is, he was sitting reading the book as well as looking at the face on the mountain, on the rock. And every time he reads the book, he would also look up at the mountain again, and it would be as if the mountain was also, the face was also listening to that poetry that he was reading. And every time he looked up, he would feel as if this face was smiling at him in a very kind way. And when he was doing this, a man came to him, a stranger, and said, "Can I have a rest at your home tonight?" That's what he said. And then this gentleman, this old man that is Ernest, was so hospitable. You know what is hospitable? Welcoming others and entertaining them well, right? And not everyone can be hospitable. Sometimes you also might have experienced some friends whom you do not like very much might visit you and you are not that happy and you show some kind of faces which is not so hospitable. But this person did not do any such thing. This old man just welcomed him, and then they were talking. And in the midst of the conversation, this man was listening to this old man, that is old Ernest. He is not a little boy anymore now. Listening to his thoughts, he found that it was so deep. The thoughts that he had in his mind were so wise that he could not understand how a man who was just living in the village could have attained so much of wisdom. This surprised him, and he found out this. So when he was still reading the book, he was holding the book, remember? He was holding the book in his hand, okay? While the stranger came. And so the stranger wanted to know whether he knows the writer of this poetry. And he said, "Do you know who wrote this?" Or he also asked the question in this way, "Do you know me?" And then old Ernest said that he did not know him. And so he said that, "I am the writer of this book. I am the writer of all this poetry." And to this, Ernest seemed to have become a little disappointed. You know why? Because the poet's face did not resemble the face that was on the mountain. And this was something that disappointed him. He looked sad, and tears began to fill his eyes. And this man, this stranger, asked him what was the reason that was making him sad. And so he said, "I expected the writer of this poetry to be in the likeness of the face that was on the mountain." But it disappointed him. Why? Because he saw the difference in the two faces. And this poet also said, "How can you expect such a great thing from me? I am just an ordinary writer." But this Ernest again said, "The things that you have written are filled with a lot of wisdom that I expect this same person to bear the likeness of this face." And in the midst of their conversation, he was also reading the book, and in the meantime they were also looking at the face. And so in the midst of their conversation, they would look up at the mountain again, and Ernest found as if this man, the face on the mountain, was also leaning towards to listen to their conversation. Because you remember, this is an extraordinary event. Two very wise men have come together to discuss their thoughts and their ideas. And Ernest found that this man was filled with wisdom. And every time, not only Ernest, every time wise men from the cities and the professors would come and find that he shares his thoughts freely without any artificiality. We know when someone comes to us with respect, we also try to change that tone. You might have experienced this a lot of time. When you are at a formal gathering, the way you speak will become different. When you are with your friends, it becomes different. And there is nothing wrong with it. I also accept that. But the way that this man presents his ideas and views are so normal that he would not make any artificiality. Everything would just flow out of his mind freely, and the way he shares his thought would be such a wise word that people could not understand how this man could have attained such wisdom. And they would be listening for hours and hours, but they do not feel tired. And knowing that this Ernest was a very wise man, though he was just an ordinary man in the neighborhood, every evening the villagers and the neighborhood will call him. All the people living in that neighborhood would gather to listen to the words that this man had to say. and he found out that this had become a custom for all of them, a daily routine that they can all follow. And so this man and Ernest went hand in hand together to the meeting. And when they went to the meeting, as usual, Ernest said his word. He spoke to the people in the neighborhood who would always listen to him very sincerely, because they found that he was such a wise man and they would love listening to him. And while listening, they were also looking at the stone face. But these villagers did not expect the stone face to come in an ordinary person from the village. But while talking, this Ernest feel as if that he could see the resemblance. He could see the similarities between the stone face and the face of Ernest. And in the midst of their talk, in the midst of their meeting, there was clouds forming around the face on the mountain. Mist, here would be light clouds, okay, thin clouds. And so there were mist that gathered just above the eye of the face on the mountain, and it appeared like the eyebrows of Ernest, and the clouds that gathered around the face appeared like the gray hair on the head of Ernest. And he was shocked. All of a sudden, without any thought, he began to shout, "Behold, behold, we can see the face of the man in Ernest." And Ernest did not expect this, because he was expecting some better person that would come in the form of this face. And he still could not believe what the man said. But in the midst of his conversation, when the clouds gathered around the face, he also began to see some brightness, as if the sun, like the sun that was setting on the face on the mountain. So he could see some brightness on the face of this old man, Ernest. And when he looked at the two faces, they looked exactly similar. And so he told the villagers, and even the villagers, even the people in the neighborhood found the similarity, the resemblance that Ernest had with the face on the mountain. But even at this time, Ernest could not believe, and after the meeting, he still went on, hoping that one day a man better than him would come to them with a resemblance, with the resemblance of the face that was on the wall. See, this is what humility means. He did not expect, even though others are saying, he did not find it worthy. He did not find that he would be worth to carry the face of such a great legend, of a face that the people, the villagers, had been talking for so long. He still went home. With this, we are going to come to a conclusion of this story. But what I want all of us to remember from the story of the great stone face is that humility is what makes us wise. We may be having a lot of qualities, a lot of degrees, but unless you are humble, you are kind and ready to learn from what the situation around is teaching you, you will never attain the wisdom that one needs to have to become great. If you want to become great, you have to realize that it is the first thing for you to humble yourself. And so I want all my dear class 8 students to know that cultivating humility at a very young age is always the key to a great success. And people will come to know about you. You will get famous, not because you want to be famous, but because of your humility. And this is the end of our lesson. I hope you have learned something from here. Thank you.